Rose Hill Cemetery was founded on February 11th, 1859. We've been here just 163 years. We predate the light bulb by 20 years. We predate the telephone by 17 years. We were here 44 years before Orville and Wilbur Wright got the first airplane up in the air. So we have a lot of history here in the United States and in Chicago. The building that you see behind me was put up in 1864. And if it looks slightly familiar, it should. We predate the water tower and pumping station on North Michigan Avenue by about 4 years. And it was built by William Boyington. And he did castellated Gothic. He loved that look of a castle. This came from a quarry in Lamont, Illinois, the limestone. We also ring that bell for all of our funeral services as they come through the main gates. And that would sound like that. A lot of people coming in, they were basically lost in a new country and they needed help. So if you've ever heard of Jane Addams' Hull House, that was one of the first social worker homes in the United States. So she set up a settlement house for all these new immigrants to help them find jobs, employment, housing, how to navigate a new country. Well, she had this wonderful idea. Charles Hull was already dead when she came up with this idea, but he left his house to his niece, who was the executrix. And his niece, Miss Culver, was friends with Jane Addams. And as the story goes, she had rented his mansion to Jane Addams for her social experiment for $1 a year for 25 years. And we're the highest elevation in the city of Chicago. We have excellent drainage because of our sandy soil. I tell families when we're done with you, we will leave you high and dry. At our cemetery, they had so much land that, years ago when this started, this was a small town ship that was going to be the town of Chittenden. And there was a railroad stop right behind here on this railroad line, and it was the very first railroad stop north of the city of Chicago back in the 1850s. They set aside in the beginning land right when the Civil War started. Okay, they set aside some choice parcels for the soldiers. They decided this would be for Union soldiers. So these are 250 Union soldiers who died. He formed commander of the 11th Illinois Infantry. They say he avoided death 4 times. Ultimately, he was only about 30 years old when he died, and he died from dysentery. He basically died of diarrhea and dysentery. George Buchanan Armstrong brought into existence the railway mail service. So they've been using the railroad since about the 1830s to deliver mail, but they never really did it right. And most of all of that stopped here east of the Mississippi. So he was postmaster here in Chicago, and he decided to bring together modern day railroad service along with the United States Post Office. And the very first mail route here in the Midwest ran from Chicago, Illinois to Clinton, Iowa. And this monument here is to George S. Bangs. He basically took over the railway mail service that Mr. Buchanan Armstrong started. They were friends and they knew each other. There's an inscription on there that says his crowning effort was the fast mail. So, again, he's the one who came up with the railroad mail sorting car. So the mail never stopped. You would pick up a bag of mail in one place, and while you were traveling to the next intersection or the next town, they were sorting it to drop off to go to the next place. It never stopped. And he's the one who developed the railroad sorting car. Where the rabbit sticks his head out the window and it hits the hook, and he goes spinning around on that railroad hook. He's the guy who invented the hook. So you would throw a bag of mail out on one hook, the train would never stop, just keep on going. You'd pick up the next bag and sort it. Very efficient, very efficient. They loved him so much that they donated the money his postal workers to build that beautiful monument. And that is built to scale on the bottom. John Willard, have you ever heard of her? You've heard of her.
My son works at Willard School.
Okay, so you know a little bit about her. So she was a pretty extraordinary woman. She was president of the WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union. So she would have been very happy when they passed the 18th Amendment on prohibition, which leads somebody about every 6 months to put a beer bottle by her grave, I think, out of spite or humor. But she was president of the WCTU, and back in the day, alcohol and alcoholism really was a plague. It still is a problem, but if you think about what heroin is and things today and all the problems they're having, that hit a lot of people just as hard back then with the alcoholism, and so she really preached against that. She was also a suffragist, so she was for the women's vote. So even though she died before the 18th Amendment, which repealed the 18th Amendment, the Prohibition, and the 19th, which granted the vote to the women, she worked very hard for that. She was the first dean of the college for ladies at Northwestern University. But if you want to hear a little bit about her daily schedule, so for 10 years, she gave 400 lectures a year. That's more than 10 a day. That's more than one a day. She traveled 30,000 miles a year. And I think she went to New York and was preparing to go to France and Britain to do another lecture series, and she caught influenza. And I'm sure between influenza and probably died of exhaustion. When you think of 400 lectures a year and 30,000 miles back in the 1880s and the 1890s, and it was all by train or stagecoach, incredible. So that's Frances Ellen Willard. I have also been told, though I've never been there, that there is a brewery in Evanston called Few. Her initials happen to be F-E-W. I think it's more than a coincidence, but I'm not sure. The distillery, Few, predates the Chicago fire by 7 years. And when Chicago started, we had a volunteer fire department. And that was fine until about the mid-1850s, and the city had gotten so big that a volunteer fire department couldn't handle it. So then they became professional firefighters. There was a terrible fire in the 1850s where a large wall fell down and killed a number of the firefighters. And that's when the city said enough with the volunteer firefighters, we're going to have to go professional. So the Firemen's Benevolent Society built this in 1864. It was designed again by Leonard Volk, the same man who designed Our Heroes. We have garter snakes out here. And when we open the door in the main office, it's nice and warm in the spring, so occasionally one will come in the main office and say hello. And we take the broom and we reintroduce it to the outside. Boat disaster, the ship disaster on Lake Michigan, it was called the Lady Elgin. The Lady Elgin was the largest maritime disaster on the Great Lakes. I think about 300 people were killed in that. And it was a small schooner that ran into a larger ship at about, I think, 1 or 2 in the morning during rough seas and a bad storm. And a number of the people washed up near Winnetka on the shores. But all of those people, most of them were brought here to Rose Hill. Well, we used to have a holding morgue back then in the 1860s, so they were brought here to be held in the morgue, at which point they waited for families to come and claim them. Well, there were, I think, about 40 or 50 people that were unclaimed. So they set aside that plot of land to bury those people. And in the meantime, all of those people were from Milwaukee. They were down here for a political event. The Milwaukee basically said, thanks, but no thanks. We'll take our own home back with us and bury them up in Milwaukee. So there actually is a public space up in one of the cemeteries in Milwaukee for the victims of the Lady Elgin disaster. But that is where they were going to go, right behind that mausoleum. I'm the computer, or my staff is the computer, and literally our fingers still do the walking. So we have about 3 centuries worth of data entry. Monument of a young man who was an artist. He died at a young age. Again, you have this tree broken off. But as a sign and tribute to him being an artist, they have an easel here with a canvas in the middle that's been slashed, never to be painted again. So a violently slashed canvas. And you could just kind of feel a lot of the grief and passion that come out of that monument.